Yes, you should download the full platform. This web profile might not be useful for you. Anyways, if you're not downloaded, then do it later. Shall if you've downloaded, let's go back and start configuring some of the items. That way you'll get a hang of it also. But before doing that, let me start. Has it already started? Yes. Okay, so the thing is that in my case, I've gone to C drive. Glassfish is where I have unzipped it, and then here you have everything. Okay, so inside this bin folder, and I think you have here also glassfish 4, and then you have this bin folder. Inside bin, you have the option of as admin. So here, using this, you can start your glassfish server. So I'll basically go here, copy this, and go to the command prompt. Go to this location. Alright, and then sorry, this is Windows, right? So you have this as admin here. So as admin, command is start hyphen domain, and then by default the first time you start the domain which is configured. In the case of this application server is domain 1, so we'll start that particular domain. So let's not discuss about the domains and the nodes etc of the application server, because that is a completely separate topic. But let's concentrate here on the main part, which is like starting the domain, and then you have the way to configure the topics and queues on the application server. So once you do this, you can click on it, and then you can it will take a while, like say 2-3 minutes for the domain to start. And once it starts, you can access the server console also. Like we'll see how to do that, but first let's let it come up. Okay, it says that the domain is started successfully, right? So we'll go here and we'll start the web console, which is localhost colon 4848. Once I click on it, you get redirected to the application server's console. So this is the one. Okay, so this is a typical application server console for the case of Glassfish. This is open source, obviously, and you can go ahead and deploy your applications also here, like the war file, etc., and it will start working for you. But let's not go there. What we'll do right now is that we'll concentrate on configuring JMS resources and then accessing it, right? So we'll just concentrate on that part. So say the JMS resources we have here, right? So JMS resources which we have here has two parts. One is the connection factory and one is the destination resources. So connection factory basically means the way to create the actual connections. Okay, so you have to create a sort of a factory. Some default settings has to be done. So last night I created for JMS/test. So the way to do this is that you go and click on connection factories. It takes some time to come over. Then you click on new, right? And then you have the option of giving the JMS name, description, and here in the connection factory say how much should how large your connection pool should be, what is the minimum pool size, what is the maximum pool size. So all those things, the pool level configurations you define at the connection factory level, and there you give the JNDA name, the resource type, the description, etc. Okay, so say the JNDA name is JMS/test1, right? And then you're done. This is a test 1 connection factory, and then you click on OK and you're done with it, right? So you have it here. And then going back to, like, say, if we refresh, see, this is coming up. Now going back to the destination resources, here you actually create the queues and topics which we talked about. So let's click on it. Okay, and see, this is the one test queue and one test topic which I've created. The way to do is you click on new, right? You give the JNDA name by which you want that particular queue to be accessed. Like, say, test one queue. So that is the case. You put JMS slash test one queue, and then you have the actual physical destination name, which is test. Let's say the name is test one queue. So I have put the name as test queue earlier. Right now I'm putting it as test one queue. And then you have to select the resource type. By default, topic is selected, but in our case we are dealing with queues, right? So we'll mark it as queue. And in the description that this is a test one queue or whatever you want to give. This is just for your knowledge. The various properties also you can associate, but let's go simple and do it like this. Right, so see, test one queue has been created, right? Similarly, we can create a test one topic, and the topic, the only thing which differs is I put a drop down where we selected queue, you select topic. So that's how you configure queues and topics on a typical application server. And this knowledge, again, I will say, the basic thing which we did is going to be the same everywhere, but every application server, whether it is JBoss or you have IBM application server, it differs from application to application server, the console and the way you enter this data, but the core data to enter it and the way to configure it almost remains the same. So you're not going to face any problems from that respect. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show to you. Now, say once you have created it, let's go here and see. So this, we have this particular thing here, and say let's do the message sender. Okay, now the message sender, here we're trying to send a message on a queue. So if you see at resources sector, there are core Java elements to ask for a resource, and the map name means the JNDA name, and the JNDA name here, if you refer to the connection factory, if you remember, the one which we created was JMS/test1. JMS/test was from beforehand, and in the queue, the actual queue where you want to connect is JMS/test queue. Okay, now you have a way to produce the messages. Okay, so produce the messages. So in the producing the messages, you have here the connection factory, and the connection factory dot create connection. So that's how you connection factory, the actual connection factory, the classes which are associated with it, they're all defined at that particular pool level. I mean, very very defined. So this helps us to get a connection using that pool configuration. So once you get this connection, then you have, then the second option is to create a session, right? Once you create a session, then you can create a producer. Now when you create a producer, the producer has to be for a specific queue. That queue information comes from JMS/test queue. All right, now that comes from JMS/test queue. So it means that we are creating a producer which produces a message which has to be sent to this particular queue. Now once we have this message producer, then you go to, like, say, session or create text message. Then you have this message where you set whatever you want to do, right? Say testing 1 2 3, can you hear me, and any particular XML message or whatever you want to send. That messaging part we don't want to concentrate, we just want to understand the framework. And then you send do a sysout, and then you, this message producer that send, you send the text message, and then it will go over to the queue, right? And then text message dot set text, do you copy, this is the second message, and again the same part. Then you have goodbye message, that is the third message. So in total you drop 3 messages in the queue, then you close the message producer, you close the session, you close the connection, and then you're done with it, right? So let's run it. Now if you see, the message has not been sent. Why? So let's go to this particular example. So here this thing is going as null pointer exception. So if you try to analyze what will be null here, connection factory can be null. So connection factory can be null, the connection factory is an injected resource, it's coming from here. So if it is null, it means that this particular JNDA configuration is not coming up, right? So we're not able to associate information using this JNDA information. So this JNDA information is coming from the application server which is there, right? Now this application server, we are running this class as a standalone class. Now, how to know that this application server is the one, which should be associated with this particular main class? That information is not there, right? So typically, application server supports configurations, or you can use the configurations which has been done at the application server level only when you run code from within that application server. So if you deploy any application at that server, you have to go and like do it there, and then you need to like run it. But from outside the application server, if you want to do anything, then what is the way out, right? The way out is that, from outside it's very, it's near to impossible to do it. So the only typical way to do it is that, like, say, Glassfish has provided a way to do it. So if I go here and say go inside Glassfish folder once more and see this particular bin. So you see here you have app client, right? Now this app client is something which enables you to run a typical jar application separately, without deploying the code on the server. So this way you can run your main classes, etc. also. So that's what I have used. The typical way to do it is that, like, say, if you want to do message sender, then you click on message sender, right? And then go ahead and export it as a jar. You can export. This jar file comes within Java, and then you click on next, right? And then, what are the default options? Let it be there, and then you go here, then again next. The important thing to do here is that to have the, if you create a jar file, right? So the most important part is to have the manifest.mf file which gets created in that jar. So if you double click on that jar, it runs automatically, right? That's because it knows which particular class to go forward, because that is specified in the manifest.mf. So since we're generating the manifest.mf and there is no manual work here, you have to specify that main class here, right? So we specify the main class here. You can go and browse and specify the one for, say, message receiver. And right now that option is not come because I've clicked only on message sender. So you click on this one, click on OK, right? It comes here. So once you do that, the manifest.mf which gets generated, it has this mentioned as a main class, and once you like run the jar, it gets run, right? You click on finish, and then you have the jar. Once you have the jar, you can place it in any location. I have typically done it here. My jar is test1, which I've already put here, okay? And then I'll try to run it using this app client. Let's go here and try to go this particular folder. Right, so we are there. So I'll run it as app client minus client, and then the jar name test1 dot jar. So it takes some time. So you see here, these are the ones which has come because of the app client, the bash shell which we are using. But here the messages, the three messages which we discussed, they have been sent. See, testing 1 2 3, do you copy, goodbye, etc. It has come. So that's how you do the sending part. Okay. Now in the case of receiving, what happens is, and let me see any questions here. Okay, good. Now let's concentrate on the receiving part. Now this is a receiver which I've written here, message receiver. So message receiver, again the same part, right? So message receiver like concentrates on the same queue, and then you have this way to create the connection first, then getting the session next, then creating the consumer from that session for this particular queue, and then moving ahead. Now there is a particular variable which we are receiving at while not goodbye received. So until the last message is received, which was basically having the text of goodbye, you do not set that variable to true. So you keep on waiting, you keep on receiving the messages. So since we have sent the message is already there on the queue. So we need to run this receiver to consume those messages. Okay. So let's see on that part. That is the only thing which is done here. Now this message receiver I've already exported as jar and put here. This is mr.jar, that is message receiver. So we'll try to run it also. So it takes 1 to 2 minutes. See, it received all the messages. First is testing 1 2 3, can you hear me? Then do you copy, and then finally goodbye. And after goodbye, if you see, that is the last message till where it waits this particular class. Then it comes out of this loop and closes everything which is open, the consumer, the session, the connection, and then you get out of it, right? So typically we have consumed all the messages. So that's how it works. Now let's say we run it again. Ideally you should not see any other messages. This will then typically wait for it forever, because we do not have any messages in the queue, right? It will wait until it receives the messages. So see, we have waiting for messages, and this waiting for messages will continue forever. Why? Because once you have this waiting for messages, there is no message to receive because you have received all the messages, right? So it typically should not do anything, and that's how it will stay forever. So this is like, say, it's waiting for a message, and this is sort of synchronous way. It's like waiting forever to consume this message. So although the producer and the consumer are not tightly coupled, but the way in which we have implemented this consumer is that it always has to wait for a message, and that's how this particular thread is always hung, right? When it waits for a message, unless it comes, it's always hung. So that's how it is. Let's close it. Right now, the other way to do it is, say, we'll go over, and JMS also gives us the option of coming up with this asynchronous receiver. Okay, now what asynchronous receiver does is, now you have test message listener here, so let's see this first. So JMS also has the option of this message listener. Okay, now what this message listener does, this message listener javax.jms.message listener, what it does is that, this is an interface, so any like implementation like which we give has to implement this on message thing, and this is a message listener which can be configured, and you need not wait for anything, right? So here, when the message comes, this message listener is notified, and all this taken care by the framework. You do not have to do anything. Now this message is here, and then you, like, for now we are just printing it, but any core logic you can put in this test message listener. So let's go to asynchronous message listener and see what we have done. So we have this map name of jms/test, and then you have this queue, right? And inside this queue you have this get messages, and inside this get messages, what we are doing, so we are creating this connection, then you have creating this session, then you have this consumer, and then in this consumer you are setting this message listener. Okay, now once you set this message listener, you start the connection, right? And once you start this connection, let's go forward. What we've done is that, like, say, this is just a sysout to say what we're doing. After that, what we're doing is that the thread is sleeping for 1000 milliseconds, which is 1 second, right? And then again you're printing the sysout. Then again the thread is sleeping for 1 second. Then again you're printing a sysout. Then again the thread is sleeping for 1 second. And then you close the consumer, you close the session, you close the connection, right? So you do all those work here. So you do, like, the starting and ending. Between this, we have not done any part, right? It's not that we have typically like started this receiver process here. It's not that we have put all this thing and specifically doing a receive and then getting the text message, etc. We're not doing anything of that sort. What we're just doing is that we have just set this message listener, and whenever uh, topic, or sorry, whenever a message comes on the queue, this listener gets notified. This listener's message on message method gets called. So all this work is done uh, by the system, by the code framework itself. We need not do anything for this part, right? And then that is done. So there is nothing else to be done. You close it and then you are done. So typically, if you start getting messages, I mean, this is the one which should always, like, say, receive it. The only thing is that, like, say, if you do it, say, 1,000 minutes later, right, say 1 hour later, now 1 hour later, like, my session is going to close, right, because you have this thread.sleep 1,000, then again 1,000, then again 1,000. So that way it keeps on going. So what you need to do is that if you want to always listen to it, then, I mean, you need to put it in a sort of infinite loop, like, say, while this is going on, and then you do that, right? Say, or you can again, like, design a thread which always keeps running every 1 second or 2 seconds, something of that sort. Now, there is a way to do it, is that, like, say, I'll give that concept, but that's not part of the current scope, so we'll not go there. But this test message listener, the message listener which you're implementing, this is sort of, say, message driven bean, right? So message driven bean is a part of the enterprise Java beans definition, which we have not dealt with because it is not part of the course structure also. So if you like, say that this is a message driven bean, then you can just configure. Now these beans are kept, like, say, one object for each bean is kept open by the server itself, and the server maintains the state, etc. So once the message driven bean is created, that bean is kept alive for the entire duration of the application server. And whenever a message comes which is related to that MDB, the message driven bean, I mean, we consume it, and it, like, we can put our business logic there. So that message driven bean also implements this message listener itself. Now, if you see this I mean, in that way, you do not have to even go ahead and implement this asynchronous message receiver or put any code to actually connect to it, because that all that work will be taken care by the framework level of code. We do not have any say there. Okay, so that's the idea, the thought which I wanted to leave you with. But anyways, I mean, we'll run this asynchronous receiver and see how it works. But again, if you see this asynchronous receiver, I mean, the messages are, I mean, let's say, not there, right? So it might not give you anything in the starting, but let's see. So you'll have to first put the messages, because you do not have the messages, and in Windows I can't open two command prompts. So let's put the messages first, and then we'll run the asynchronous message receiver. So the message is put. We'll try this asynchronous receiver jar, which I've already put in that particular location, and we'll run it. See, here you have consumer messages 1 second, after 1 second, and then you are done with it, right? This is asynchronous way of doing the work, and that's what has been defined in this particular com.jms package, right? So this is all about JMS as far as Glassfish is concerned, and now we'll stop the domain, right? So we'll go wherever our thing was there. And do you have any questions? If you have any questions, you can ask me. So now we have stopped the domain. So since we have stopped the domain, if you refresh this, it will go away because this is basically application servers console, right? So this basically goes away. So after you stop the domain, right? Any questions till now? Any questions? No, please ask me if you have anything. Now this is Apache ActiveMQ which I have downloaded from the Apache site. The version is 5.10.0, so you can also download. Here if you go and see, again it's a typical MQ server. Inside this bin you have all this stuff, right? So here my system is bin 64. So I'll go inside this. I have this ActiveMQ batch file. Once I run this, the ActiveMQ will start, right? So it starts up. So see, it says that the web console is available at this particular location, localhost colon 8161. So there if you go and see, it's available. The only thing is that you need to know the password to access it. So I have not done that much research. There should be a default password which you can see. See, this is the one. From here, if you want, you can click here. It asks for user ID password which you can give, but I do not have that information as of now. I need to see that, like what is the default user ID and password. If I give that, I can access the web console. Okay, but anyways, that was not my intention of showing that like you can do it from the web. I'll show this app.java class which we have. Now this class, there is a local method called as thread, and there we are passing this producer, and sometimes in between we have the consumer also. So let's see both of them. So we have this thread, inside that we're passing instance or enable, right? And then whether it is daemon or not, and then we are starting this thread. So say for hello world producer, what we're doing is, first of all we are creating a connection factory. Now there, if you remember in Glassfish, we gave all the information going ahead and in the console, right? We created all the connection factory and the queues. That thing we are doing here programmatically here itself, right? So we are not like kind of config creating connection factory and the queues and the topics first in the server. That you can do if you access that web console. But if you are the web console which is showing for Apache MQ. But if you do not do that, then you can go ahead and like do it manually from the program itself. In the case of ActiveMQ, first is that this ActiveMQ connection factory class is there. Then you connect to it using this, saying that this is the way to create the connection factory, VM colon localhost. And then once you have this connection factory, you create the connection and you start the connection. Now from this connection, you create the session, and then again you create the queue, because we create the queue because we do not have the queue yet, right? There we had the queue, here we are creating it up front. So now we are creating the queue. Then once you have created the queue, you create the producer for that particular queue, and then you set the delivery mode which is non-persistent. It means that you need not receive the messages on the queue, right? And then you have this text message you're trying to send, and once you send it, the producer has done its job. Similarly, we have a separate thread which is running, which is the consumer thread. It again refers to this connection factory, and it creates it creates this connection, and then it creates this queue also, right? So the queue is already existing, it will not create it, it will use it, but that's how you invoke a session.create queue, and then you create the consumer for that particular queue, and then you receive the messages for it, right? And this is the time period for which you need to wait for it to receive the messages, and then you print the messages all along, right? Since this is a sort of thread and both of them will be running, you can see the work, and here you need not deploy in the server, you can run it as a separate standalone application. And that's the beauty of the MQ product. So see here, we have all this sent messages, etc., etc., and then you have received messages also, right? So this is a typical implementation for the ActiveMQ part. If you see, the concepts have remained the same, right? Between the JMS specification for Glassfish server and for ActiveMQ, the only thing which has changed is the way in which we are accessing it. right? And that is up to the vendor to implement it whichever way they want, as long as the specification remains the same for them. Okay. So that's what we had for ActiveMQ. Any questions till now, guys?